You're not blood related to your daughter, right? When I heard this from my daughter's fiancé, I couldn't believe my ears. Then, from my daughter's mouth came the further blow. I don't want you to be involved in my life anymore. I was left in disbelief, looking back and forth between their two faces. Although my daughter, who was my husband's child from my previous marriage, indeed had no blood connection to me, I had nurtured her with love for 16 years. The kindness you receive from others should not only be returned to them, but also given to many more people. And the kindness you give should be forgotten the moment it's done. Suddenly, this famous saying came to mind, and I quietly nodded several times, conceding with, I understand. However, no one could have imagined at that time that this event would trigger such an unbelievable incident. My name is Melissa. I'm a 44-year-old homemaker. I graduated from community college and worked as secretary. When I was 28, I started working at a certain startup when I fell in love with an executive director named George. George was a decade older, at 39, but he was good at his job and full of compassion. I accepted his proposal, feeling confident that I could have a peaceful life with him. George had a daughter, Jenny, from his late first wife. My parents vehemently opposed the wedding, claiming, he's 12 years older, divorced, and has a kid. That's outrageous. But I insisted and decided to marry him despite their objections. At that time of our marriage, Jenny was still 10 years old and in a sensitive stage of her life. Feeling lonely after the loss of her mother and confused by her father bringing a strange woman home, she remained silent most of the time, always carrying a worn-out hippo plushie she had since she was little. I did everything in my power not to hurt her feelings. I even turned down George's wish for more children, persuading him to focus on our peaceful life together as a trio. I reiterated that even if she wasn't my biological child, she was still a precious child because she mattered to George. In the end, George gave in to my perseverance, and I ended up raising Jenny alone. I made sure to understand everything about her likes and dislikes in food, her favorite TV shows, books, idols, and served her with like her own personal secretary. Even then, she kept her heart guarded. But when she bought a single carnation for Mother's Day in her first year of middle school, I was so touched that I burst into tears. Seeing an adult cry startled her, but she gingerly patted my shoulder with her always carried hippo plushie. Seeing this, I felt somewhat amused and remarked, Wow, that little one sure is amazing. It made my tears stop. Upon hearing this, Jenny's face brightened and she raised her plushie high, proudly saying, Yes, this little one is amazing. When I hold it, I can forget about all the bad stuff. Since that day, we gradually started to get closer. Whether it was going shopping together, going to concerts, or sharing hobbies, we became a really close mother and daughter pair. By the time she became a college student, George would even tease, Jenny only hangs out with her mom. The turning point in our relationship came when Jenny had been working for about 3 years. She secretly told me, I've got a boyfriend. Don't tell Dad. He was one of George's colleagues, manly, smart, and clearly she was head over heels for him, which was evident from her glowing face when she talked about him. By that time, George had risen to the position of CEO, and his company had established itself as a top-tier corporation from a mere startup. About half a year later, Jenny started to act somewhat aloof toward me. When I suggested, "Let's go shopping this Sunday. It's been a while. I'll buy you something," she would decline, claiming she was busy, even though she seemed to just be lounging around at home. Even the concerts of Typhoon, the band we both were fans of, she evaded saying, "I've decided to go with my friends." I felt lonely, but considering she was no longer a child, I tried to take it positively and thought it might be time for me to let go and perhaps find a new hobby. During such time, George, who was the company's president, suddenly collapsed. Fortunately, he was found early and his life was saved, but it was a critical situation. I visited the hospital every day. Due to the lengthy hospital stay, George had become rather weak-willed and would mumble worriedly about Jenny. Jenny visited the hospital frequently as well, and seeing her father worry so much, she consulted her boyfriend. He proposed, "Would it be alright if we got engaged on the premise of marriage, so your father can be at ease?" When George met Jenny's boyfriend, he cried tears of joy and bowed his head, saying, "Please take good care of my daughter." So they decided to have their wedding earlier to ease George's worry and plan a small ceremony with close relatives right after New Year's. George was thrilled to be able to see Jenny as a bride. "I'm going to fight to get out of here by the wedding," he said. "Don't push yourself too hard. Even if you can't, it's fine to do it remotely." The doctor had said it would be impossible for him to be discharged by the time of the ceremony, so preparations were being made for a remote connection. However, something that bothered me was that while Jenny's fiancé had introduced himself to George in the hospital, he hadn't made any attempt to meet me, and it didn't seem like Jenny was interested in introducing him either. There were discussions about who from our relatives should be invited to the wedding, but there was never any talk about inviting her fiancé home. Thinking he might be busy, I didn't press the issue. Then, when looking at the seating chart on the wedding invitation, I realized there was no seat for me. Thinking it might be a printing mistake, I asked Jenny about it. "Oh, that's because you're a stranger. I said we're only inviting relatives," she said. I was speechless. A stranger? When I said that in a small voice, Jenny averted her eyes and said, "I'll bring Tom over next time. We'll talk then," and ran off to her room. The word stranger echoed in my head, and I didn't understand what was happening. The following weekend, Jenny's fiancé, Tom, came over. He was tall and looked very competent, but as soon as he entered the house without a proper greeting, he said, "I'm busy, so let's make this quick." I was left with an unpleasant impression. This didn't seem like a very good first impression for the man who was to be my future son-in-law. I served the two of them tea and took a seat on the sofa, starting with, "Thank you for making the effort to come over today. I really wanted to meet and have a proper conversation." In response, Tom said in an irritated tone, "I did say I'd keep it brief, right? Didn't you hear that? What's this all about?" He was putting pressure on me. So I politely explained, "Well, you see, you're going to be my son-in-law. I know you've talked to my husband, but I wanted to have a serious talk as well." To this, Tom, waving his hand as if to shoo away a dog, responded, "Oh, all right. I get it. We're all good. This is about the wedding seating plan, isn't it? So basically, you're picking a fight, right? Can you believe he said that? The impression I had of him from when my daughter first started dating him was quite different. But my daughter, who was sitting next to me, did not seem particularly surprised and was calmly drinking her tea. This made me worry about whether he always behaved like this. I'm not trying to pick a fight, I replied. I just wanted explanation because I found that I don't have a seat. No, so the thing is, Tom responded with a half smile. We're not inviting strangers to the wedding. You're not really related by blood, are you? I was left speechless. Even without a blood connection, we've lived as mother and daughter for 16 years. I consider her my child, I replied. Looking towards my daughter, Jenny didn't meet my gaze and said nothing. Instead, Tom leaned forward and said, You mean you're more like a babysitter, right? I'm pretty sure that's what George was thinking too. Doesn't it seem a bit presumptuous to play the lady of the house? What on earth was he saying? I couldn't understand the meaning of his words, so I stiffened as he continued to speak. You should feel a bit embarrassed, don't you think? If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't have the nerve to demand to be invited to the wedding as a mother, right, Jenny? When he turned the conversation towards her, Jenny lifted her head and said, Yeah, I agree. I never thought you would ask to be invited to the wedding. She said it to my face. My daughter suddenly seemed like a stranger. Was this really Jenny? See, even your daughter agrees with me, Tom continued. I don't mean to be rude, but aren't you done here? I think George mentioned something like that the other day. That can't be true, I protested, but to my disbelief, Jenny said, I don't know about Dad, but I don't want you to have anything to do with you for the rest of my life. I was so shocked. It felt as if the world had turned black and white. Tom raced at his wristwatch saying, Oh, look at the time. I have to go now, and left the room, but I was too stunned to see him off. I just sat there, stunned, on the sofa. When Jenny came back after seeing him off, she tidied up the teacups mechanically and without even glancing at me, went into her room. What were these past 16 years all about? The family photos hanging in the living room seemed to mock me. The red sunset came in through the window, felt painfully intense on my eyes. Since the day I came to this house, I have lived for my husband and daughter, cleaning and cooking every day, serving them with all my might. Did it all mean nothing? Staggering to my feet, I started thinking about what I needed to do next. Tom was talking about my husband, but he couldn't check with the man in the sickbed. I didn't want to spoil my daughter's joyous wedding either. I practiced smiling in front of the mirror so my husband wouldn't notice anything. Then came the wedding day. The hotel venue was resplendent with signs and the tables were beautifully arranged. What was different from a normal wedding was that even at the reception time, no one guest had arrived. I appeared in the venue pushing a wheelchair. Jenny, in her wedding dress, and Tom, in his tuxedo, was looking around the empty venue, bewildered. What is going on? Why isn't anyone here? As they both looked puzzled, we approached them. Both Tom and Jenny made a shocked face as they saw the man in the wheelchair I was pushing. George, I thought you couldn't leave the hospital. Dad, is it okay for you to be here? Before the shocked duo, George said, It's a big day for my precious daughter and wife. I couldn't just lie in bed, in resounding voice. His voice had a dignity and confidence of a man who had been leading people for a long time. I placed my hand on my husband's and felt a sense of gratitude for something. The doctor was also surprised that he had recovered as much in such a short time. George glared at Tom and said, "Let's have you explain a few things," calmly, making Tom break out into a cold sweat, wiping his face with a handkerchief, unable to articulate his words. Where did his high and mighty attitude from when he visited our home go? What's the reason my wife doesn't have a seat? Well, I didn't expect you to come. So you would have invited her if I was there? No, it's not like that. The relatives had many opinions about the second wife attending the wedding. My wife has been helping with caregiving at the relatives' house and regularly visiting the hospitalized relatives. She's known to be very kind. When George said that, Tom started to get visibly flustered. Oh, that's strange. That's different from what I heard. Jenny told me so. What? Suddenly asked. Jenny stared at Tom in her natural state. I didn't say anything like that. As Jenny started to speak, Tom interjected. More importantly, why are the relatives not here? George sighed as he looked at the two and said, That's easy. The relatives who saw the seating plan without my wife's name thought it was strange and asked me when they came to visit me yesterday. It seemed you've been referring to my wife as a stranger. His last words were filled with a terrifying anger. Even I, who was nearby, felt frightened. The actual Tom was shivering with a pale face and in a strained voice. I was doing it for the boss. I thought it was for the best. Jenny agreed with me, and sought agreement from Jenny again. Looking altered loss, Jenny replied, What? Tom, with a force as if he was about to attack, railed on her. You agreed, didn't you? You said you never owned anything to her. You said it was a nuisance to have her acting like your mother. What are you even talking about? I just did what you told me. Shut up, be quiet. As Tom yelled Jenny in a fit of rage, threw her tiara at him. You're the one who needs to be quiet. Stop acting like a parasite. Tom looked taken aback. It was as if time stood still for a moment. You always act so submissive around my father, but so arrogant around my mother. It's embarrassing. Jenny? I finally realized that all the stories you told me about my mother and father were lies. What are you saying? Don't act so high and mighty. Tom was clearly taken back by Jenny's outburst. Jenny, who had come to a realization, suddenly let out a sigh and said, It was all a lie. She then grabbed the hem of her white dress and started to cry. As I wiped away her tears with a handkerchief, my daughter looked up at me and began to mumble in a small, monotone voice. He told me that you married for the wealth. It struck me that I've never visited your family's home, and that you had a relationship with my father before my biological mother passed away. He said you've been betraying us from the start. He mentioned that these rumors are going around the office. I let out a sigh and said, I only became your father's secretary after mother passed away. And I'm sorry, but my family was rich, so I wasn't after the money. But they disowned me when I married a divorced man. Jenny crumpled her face and said, I'm sorry, Mom, and clutched onto me. I hugged her back and said, Silly girl, while patting her head like a child. Maybe she had been anxious all this time, wondering whether a mother who isn't related by blood could truly love her daughter. I took out something from a paper bag and handed it to her. It was a stuffed hippo that she used to carry around her when she was young. I had taken it out of a storeroom. I thought you might need this today. Jenny looked at it with surprised eyes and then held it close, saying, "You knew you were the best, Mom," as she laughed through her tears. "Of course, honey." And I laughed with her, and in the end, we both cried our hearts out, hugging the stuffed hippo. We both could feel each other's loneliness through the warmth of our bodies. George looked at us and said, "Don't forget about your old man." We both burst out laughing. Poor Tom was left kneeling on the floor, dumbfounded. But when George said, "You will face the consequences. Prepare yourself," it seemed as if something snapped in him and he started yelling, "Damn it! I thought I could marry this woman and take all the wealth for myself. Damn it!" He kicked a nearby chair and looked around the empty venue. He shouted, "Damn it! Damn it!" Presumably, Tom schemed to exploit a young woman he'd met by chance, fueled by a desire for wealth. He planned to possess everything, estranging my husband and me by calling me a stranger and not inviting me to their wedding. I suspect the aim was to drive my husband and me to divorce and thus compel me to renounce my inheritance rights. In other words, his plan to marry my daughter was entirely motivated by his desire to gain my husband's assets. Upon discovering this, my husband leveraged all his power to prevent Tom's relatives from attending the wedding. The very people themselves, Tom and my daughter, George, came to straighten them out, pushing through his sickness to make it to the venue. When Tom made too much of the commotion, the security guards at the venue came to subdue him. He started to resist violently like a wild animal, and they couldn't manage him. Eventually, the police were called, and he was escorted to the station on the charge of obstructing business. After that, the marriage between Tom and my daughter was naturally called off. Luckily, they hadn't registered their